So that's happening, yet from grade schools to colleges, the teaching must go on, and some colleges continue to experiment with who they use as experts as our world changes in so many ways. Johns Hopkins now offering a hip-hop program with Grammy award-winning artist Lupe Fiasco as a professor. It's a name many remember.
He like the governor called and he told him to wait. Unstrap him from the chair and put him back in his cage.
Lupe is dope. He came out with a very innovative style.
You gon' touch this guy? Yes. Guess who's on third? Lupe still like Lupe in the third.
While Kanye West made Jesus Walks, Lupe Fiasco remixed the beat.
Yeah. They made Rap Genius because of you?
Yeah. Top lyricists of all time. Lupe Fiasco.
Let's go to Paris.
Guess who's on third? Lupe Fiasco, the Grammy-winning artist and now educator making his beat debut. Welcome.
Hey, Ari, how you doing?
Doing great. As an educator, we first wanted to sort of check in and think, what are you doing and how do you view what has been at times a crackdown in education, whether that's in the culture, local censorship? We had federal funding news tonight. I got a lot to ask you about, but first I thought I'd ask you that.
I think when it comes to like censorship, you got to be careful, even if the critique of what you're trying to censor is valid. Like it's just bad information, it's bad science, or it's just insulting for the sake of insulting. There's some kind of like blowback to that, where it's like you might wind up creating something that's equally as dangerous or problematic as the thing you were trying to solve. So I think things like the prohibition, we try and censor something like alcohol, look at alcohol as a narrative of how that kind of was playing out through society. You wound up creating or fueling or empowering kind of organized crime, at the same way. And not to say that those things are, too relative or too equal. I just think you have to approach it very carefully. And then, what are some other mechanisms of censorship that we might not be like thinking about? Where it's like you have things like paywalls, you have things in academia itself where like people can't even get to the information, whether it's censored or not. They don't have like access or motivation to get to it. And then even beyond that, like if you even get this information, do you have the tools or the access to the laboratories or to the spaces that we can actually use it and actually kind of utilize it in a way to make society a better place? So I think it's a complex issue, and I try and approach it from like all those different facets. The one that kind of speaks to me the most is these kind of academic paywalls. Like when I got into higher education as a professor, one of the things that was like the greatest moment was like, oh, I had free access to all these kind of white papers, and I was like, what if people from my neck of the woods were aware, or they had that kind of like, I could understand people bumping into those limitations, whether information is censored or not. Right. That got to pay $250 to get access.
You sort of get what you're saying is we should also be skeptical of and really question what is resource-based censorship, right? That's putting up walls. I think that's really interesting. I want to ask you about some of the teaching you're doing, but while I had you, I was thinking, what do I want to talk to Lupe about? And there's been these revived discussions over gender and masculinity. And so here we are, we're both just two men doing our things. I often look at this on this program through the lens of culture. So I wanted to run some thoughts by you. Hip hop has, of course, been both celebrated and at times criticized for how it channels masculinity. We all know about the early tough persona, the so-called gangster rap of the 90s. I'll remind viewers, you've had a very different approach, really your whole career, more about skateboarding and wisdom or even nerding out. We checked your early reviews, talked about a brainy positivity and social commentary. And more recently, artists who've come after you are completely blowing up masculinity. I mean, Young Thug is beloved out of Atlanta for his music and so many reasons, but I've got a picture of him up there in a dress. Lil Uzi Vert is certainly doing it different at Coachella. So I wanted to hand you the platform and get your reflections on how you did it or how you felt as an artist, as a man in America, and what you see in the younger generation. So much of this is coming negative in the discourse, and yet what we see, what I just showed with those photos, seems pretty more vibrant, experimental, positive. Just curious your thoughts on all of that.
I think it's a cycle. Like if you go back to hip hop and its inception, there was a lot more experimentation in terms of how people dressed, kind of from a dress code standpoint, what people were wearing, because it was kind of right next to coming out of kind of disco. And I just think you have more kind of acceptance in the fashion world of kind of taking chances, taking risks that weren't necessarily tied to gender in any way. So I think you go back and you look at old pictures of Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5, and you fast forward to even the pictures that are on screen now with Uzi Vert. It's some of the same clothes. Like you could swap them out, and you wouldn't be able to tell the difference to a certain degree. I do think that we kind of hit through certain periods in hip hop where homophobia was very, very much so pushed, even underneath kind of the conscious push. It was almost like part of the conscious push was kind of like homophobic in certain ways. And it definitely was in the
conscious kick push, but go ahead.
Yeah. But it was definitely within the neighborhoods that I grew up in, where that part of it was you had to be a man, and this is what a man did, and this is how a man dressed and walked and talked. And I think that we're in somewhat of a post-homophobic space in hip hop, thanks to kind of movements like the LGBTQ movement and different folks within hip hop coming and speaking their different points of view and their stories, and there being an audience that wants to hear that and kind of like appreciates that, and creates a safe space for those things to kind of be talked about. I never like distinctly or tried to like intentionally push any type of agenda like that. It was just me being me, and what came out of that was the things that kind of came out of that. But I do, want to send big shouts out to, the artists that are taking those risks, and even they think they might be taking risks, but it's like, yeah, they were doing that back in the 70s and kind of the early days too. So it's keeping up with tradition.
And like you say, it's ebb and flow, and culture can be an echo. It's interesting because we're hearing from you on this show for the first time that you're saying that was you being you. You weren't necessarily subverting, although it felt like that. Before you get out of here, you're doing all this academic work. Johns Hopkins, this is a big honor. You've also taught at Yale and MIT. Let's take a look at one of the MIT lectures.
Relax yourselves. Let your conscience be free. You're not rolling with the thugs from the MIT, you feel me? Not thugs, but rappers. Constantly revising, constantly being dynamic, right? Because that's what rap deserves.
I got about 90 seconds before we hand off to the other hour. What does it mean to you to be a part of these prestigious institutions, platforming and recognizing the American art form of hip hop?
Well, I'm still at MIT. Right before this, I actually had to put together my lecture for tomorrow. So I'll be at MIT for another 3 years teaching. Yeah. Johns Hopkins starts in the fall. It's my mission post kind of career was to put rap in a space where it could be researched thoroughly, where it can be put in front of the minds of some of the smartest minds in the world, specifically my students at MIT. And to kind of look at it and approach it from all these different facets to establish it as a kind of true American creative process that deserves to be put in the same like halls as Shakespeare and Walt Whitman and other kind of American classics. And I think it deserves that. And being able to be at MIT with it, I'm able to kind of apply physics and math and all these different, cognitive science. When you come to class, you see like, oh, we're doing differential equations as it relates to kind of conceit diffusion through a model, right? So it's like all these ways to approach it, which I think are exciting. I think they'll, have some benefit down the line to the next generation. That now when you want to become a rapper, you can take a CS class or you can take an engineering class and find relative moments where they connect. So it's just beyond artistic expression. So for me, that's super exciting. MIT's home, but, excited to be at Johns Hopkins in the fall as well. So be good.
Yeah. From the college dropout to teaching college is pretty good,
I didn't go to college. I went straight from high school straight into.
No, I meant the Kanye album.
Oh yeah, I just want people to. I didn't drop out.
No, by the way, the Beat viewers, if they hear me say something, they know it's probably a lyric, Lupe. They're not thinking you dropped out. I'm playing. But no, it's really interesting to catch up with you, and you think about the educator phase that you're in, and that being a part of what's on campus, the same way jazz or blues or country would be part of a curriculum. And so I'm out of time, but Lupe Fiasco, thanks for joining us.
All right. Thank you, brother. Appreciate you. Keep up the fight. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you for your time. That does it for The Beat.